Welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon, and I'm the host of A Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present, and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. Hello, everybody.
We've missed you, Sharon. We didn't have you on the last couple.
No.
Well,
It's like we've hardly talked to each other, Phil.
It is. Welcome, everyone, to this podcast. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. This podcast is all about helping you as a professional, where you make the choices that affect you in your classroom for the betterment of your students. We hope to open some doors for you today. It's about using the fullness of the curriculum in Australia, the Australian curriculum. We think great teaching can never be packaged into a program. Quality children's literature surrounds our students and is also central to our teaching. Modelling explicit reader and writer actions and providing an entry point for every child is so important. And allowing students to use the strategies that have been modelled to them in their own reading and writing, very important one. Welcome newcomers. We love hearing from new people, and join our Facebook page to get in touch as well. And why not sign up for our newsletter? That would be handy. And now some chatty rambles. Sharon, cheese and chocolate?
Yes.
Question mark.
Yeah, question mark indeed.
Mm.
Well, I thought I'd just bring this to, sometimes I feel like, like we all need lives outside of the classroom, really, because that's, what helps us bring new energy and new insights, back to our students as well. So, we're often accused, I suppose, when we have friends over, that we do very teacher-type things. And I am going to talk about one of those things, being the cheese part, because we've got this wonderful at our central market here.
Oh, before you say
yes.
that, you gave everyone a name tag. That was very teacher.
Yes.
Even though there was only like 8 people.
No, but it does show that we like to bring groups of people together that don't necessarily know each other.
Yes.
So
we have been doing that, haven't we?
Yeah. So
fun.
it is a bit like a classroom. Here we are, always wanting to, do this together, build community.
So you went to the market.
Yes, we've got this wonderful store at the market that has local cheeses from around the world. And so I just love being able to go there and learn something new by asking the expert there to help me put together, for the people that, we've got coming, what would be a great selection of cheeses for us to have.
And so the man there or lady there
yes,
helped you.
That's it. And then I get to learn about...
Oh, they gave you the story behind the cheese.
Yes.
Oh.
And I just love that.
Mm.
It's like, here's the expert giving me the insights into something that I don't know a lot about. I certainly enjoy cheese, but I love learning about it. And each time I go, I love that it's a different collection of things that I get to experience and purchase. And then I just love sharing that information with people when they come to ours.
So everything that's got a story with it is much more powerful than not having a story with it.
I reckon it is. Yes, yeah. And I fully love that.
And that's and our teaching is better with stories.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes.
Creates meaning, it draws people in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I love that, on that night, because we had a winemaker who was one of the guests, that 2 of the cheeses happened to have been matured in wine or vine leaves.
Oh, great.
So anyway, I will just quickly mention, I did say cheese and chocolates because not only do I like learning new things from other people, but I also like having that little experimentation myself with new things. And my new foray was into some chocolate making, which we all benefited from because they actually worked out.
Yeah.
So that was, nice to have that something that's a bit of fun. I enjoy doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that I want to, try new things out. And that's what we want to do with our students too, is to bring new things to them, to have them trying new things out and enjoying new experiences and knowing that they're things that you can have a go at.
Now, Sharon, in schools this week, rubrics
Yes.
have been a feature.
Yes, they certainly have been. So
Tell us more.
So the rubric development that we've been doing, particularly, that yesterday, big day of working on that. But the rubric itself, when teachers have that opportunity to really think about, like what I think a rubric really helps us to clarify as teacher is, that we can get clear about what is it that we are expecting of our students and of ourselves through this. And I'll say the ones we were working on in particular were writing rubrics. And so in working with teachers around that and developing them together, we're really able to bring a whole lot of things together. One, the Australian curriculum can drive things, but also then for us to really get clear about what it is that we're going to be bringing to them as teachers, and for our students to also know what it is that they're going to be engaged with during that unit. So really, we might have in our plans the things around what we're going to do in a unit, but if we've got a rubric that goes with that and we bring that to our students right up front, it really gives them the opportunity to know, this is how I'm to be successful. So for those of us that like to include success criteria in what we're doing, there's such a nice match and link to the rubric because in many ways that's where the success criteria sits.
Or good readers, good writers, actions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's real power in designing those, we can use, rubrics that we come across, that others have made, but to be able to do that thinking and planning. And of course, this week in schools happened to be the last week of the term for us in South Australia. And so, of course, that's a wonderful time to be thinking forward to the next term and what we're planning for and wanting to achieve. And, of course, using that rubric to look back at what students have done and achieved in this term so that we can be really focused on what we're bringing into the next term.
And on to our podcast topic today, thinking about reading. What's the teaching struggle here, Sharon?
So thinking about reading, could have called it comprehension, but really wanted to bring this idea of thinking about reading because the teaching struggle, and I can remember this as clear as a bell, even though it's a long time ago when I first started teaching. What I was doing was what I thought I was to be doing, and that was after students had been reading that I would have questions for them to think about in response to that reading. And it really worried me that what I was getting back from them just didn't give me a sense that they had engaged with that text, that they were really having that opportunity to do big thinking about and did reading that text or that piece of text and answering those questions do anything to actually grow them as thinkers about what they had read and the meaning that they were able to get from that, and was it even tantalising text that I'd been working with, and bringing to them. So the struggle for me was really then to think about, well, if I'm not doing that, if it's not that, what is it? And so how do I, how can I enable my students to do better thinking, bigger thinking about their reading? And there were two really big influences in that. One was the work of Brown and Palinsar, who, for those of you that have come across reciprocal teaching, that has stemmed from their work. And that was the first time that I was really confronted, and reading their work, I thought about, wow, if I'm getting students to think about their reading afterwards, what am I asking them to do? Like, aren't they to be thinking as they're reading so that they can think better about it as they're in the act of thinking? So Palinsar and Brown definitely started getting me, like that was kind of like the prompt for me to start thinking differently. But I still wasn't sure, well, what is that going to look like then? And as teachers, that's what we're always thinking then. Okay, so the research tells us absolutely, that we need to be getting them thinking about reading in better ways. But then what am I doing to get them there? And the person who absolutely unlocked that door for me was Aidan Chambers. And his book, Tell Me, which I can highly recommend to people. But in fact, I don't think I read the book first. I think I heard Aidan Chambers speak before I read the book. So at a conference, Aidan Chambers was talking about that our reading is really it can only be transformational to us if we're actually doing the thinking and the talking about it. Otherwise, it's not transformational. It might be a transaction that we undertake, but it's not transforming us as, like, what do we say all the time about reading should, and good literature should help us to learn more about ourselves and our world and others.
I knew that was coming.
I'm surprised you didn't jump in there with it. So I'm hoping I'm not making this too complex and convoluted here, but it was really that was the absolute problem for me, was that real struggle of how am I getting them, why can't I get them to engage and think more about the text that we're working with, rather than it just being really not low level thinking. I just wasn't giving them the opportunity to think and talk in bigger ways.
And through that, they get really deeply engaged in what they're reading and get so much more out of it.
Yes.
Comprehension, everything.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, are you going to tell us all about Tell Me?
Yes. So I was going to say, haven't given any answers here,
No.
but that was the struggle.
Mm. Oh,
And
yes. Okay.
Yes. And I don't think that's an unusual struggle, because I have that conversation with teachers.
Because as children get older and they're not getting that engaged in what they're reading, then it can drop off, can't it? Like
but even for our young ones, in fact, some research has been done about the kinds of discussion or questions parents even ask preschoolers. Sometimes it can be, what colour was somebody wearing? What did the what did this character do? When in fact deep thinking comes from much deeper conversation than that. And so you're right that later on, for our older readers, you know, we still want to be getting them, but right from the beginning, like our children's capacity to think is huge. And we don't want to put limits on that. We just really, this is about really flinging open those doors.
Because they can access any story really through read aloud. You know, that's from day one, isn't it, at school?
Yes.
Shall we dig deeper now,
So
Sharon?
let's dig deeper. So thinking about reading is different than just thinking whilst we're reading.
Okay.
Like thinking about reading is, you know, we are really, you know, it's not just, you know, as we read, I've just made a connection, or I've just done this, or, that's interesting, or that's, you know, whilst we're reading, thinking about it is really bringing together more things than just what's there on the page. So we're really doing a lot more. We're being much more conscious of the connections that we're making. And so we might, you know, as an adult example, you know, as we're reading, we don't go into the text going, oh, right, today as I'm reading, I'm going to make connections. Or today as I'm reading, I'm going to visualise. Or today as I'm reading, I'm going to be
Summarising.
or summarising. Like we don't go into reading like that. But what we find ourselves doing, if we're thinking about it as we're reading, is we find ourselves doing those things. So we might be reading something and we think, you know, isn't it amazing how I can almost hear the voice of that character? You know, that I can hear the cadence of it, or I can hear the tone of it. And it's like the author is, you know, I can, through the author, it's like I'm recreating that in my mind. That's the kind of thinking I'm doing as I catch myself. That's the kind of thinking that we're trying to catch. That's the kind of thinking, and I'll talk in a moment about how can we get our students there. But I'm just trying to define in the first instance what does it mean to be thinking about reading. So it's not thinking at the time, that's probably an important thing to remember because I'm going to get asked about that. Or it's not that. It's that thinking of, isn't that interesting? And how did the author... It's a lot about how is the author doing that? And we're not intentionally sitting there necessarily going, how's the author doing? But we are thinking, wow, how am I experiencing that? We're orchestrating a whole lot of thoughts. So where I said before, I'm not going into a text going, today I'm going to visualise as I'm reading, or today I'm going to make connections. But thinking about reading means I draw on these things as I'm reading. So over the life of this text, and let me just clarify too that to begin this, the best way to be teaching it is through read aloud for a start, and to be allowing students to do the thinking about the text as they're listening, because all other things are off the decoding, the monitoring.
No other impediment, is there? You can go straight into it.
Yeah, not that it's an impediment, but it's not an overload of those things. I can learn a lot about thinking about my reading as I'm listening to text, so that I've got that, because I can practice doing it as I'm listening, I can then take it into my own reading. So that's one of the strongest ways for me to learn about that process.
It's like rehearsing.
Yes, yes. And of course, not only rehearsing and practicing it, but the talking about it collectively. You know, the conversations that we have about that are important ways for us to be able to express that thinking and explore those things that we have been thinking about. So as I'm thinking about text, or thinking about what I'm listening to, or if I'm thinking about as I'm reading my own text, I might be doing a whole lot of things at once. I might be gathering some important information. I might be making connections with the world at that very time. Like, I'm thinking, oh, wow, listen to, this place they're talking about. I've been to a place a bit like that. I can almost smell what they're describing there, because now all of those sorts of thoughts go through our mind at rapid pace.
But it's catching that, isn't it? And recognising that you're doing that. Is it? Yeah.
And as teachers, that we're valuing it.
Mm.
That they're important thoughts to be having, not just in isolation, but that these things are building onto our understanding of text, and that we are building a whole lot of things concurrently.
So modelling
not
it
singular things.
Modelling it in a read aloud would be really powerful for them to see that happen.
Well, I don't need to over model it.
Mm-hmm.
I do need to and we'll talk a little bit about, it really comes not so much from the modelling, but from the questions that we ask.
Okay.
The question we lead with, rather than the question that we ask after the reading. It's really about the questions we ask before we read. So what kind of thinking are we doing about this text?
That's a bit of gold there, Sharon.
Thank you.
Not even silver, it's gold.
So, of course, this reflecting on our thinking, we call metacognition. And so what metacognition actually means is big thinking. And that's what we want our students to be able to get into, because big thinking means bigger understanding. And the bigger the understanding we can have about what we're reading or listening to, the more we learn, the more we grow, the more we bring to the next text that we hear or listen to, or that we bring to when somebody tells us something, we can have empathy for them because we've experienced, we've been thinking about that as we've been reading, whatever it is, what we learn about ourselves and world and others, that's what we really want to be able to get to. So this is why Aidan Chambers completely changed the way that I led with the kinds of
better questions,
but leading the thinking that I wanted students to engage in.
Mm-hmm. So what did he come up with?
So here's some examples, and you'll start hearing from the language where these questions are going. And because it comes from, actually he's got two books. One is Tell Me and the other one is Book Talk. So a lot of these begin with Tell Me, not all of them, but I'm going to start with a couple of Tell Me ones. What I'm going to just do is, from Aidan Chambers' book Talk, I'm going to give some of the examples of questions, or they're not probably questions as much as I would call them thinking prompts, because they're the prompts to think about reading. So I'm going to read some of these out, and as I do that, I'd be really interested for people to kind of put themselves in the position of listener or reader, to think about, what would I be doing as a reader if I was asked that kind of question? So let's have, and maybe we can have a bit of discussion about some of those and how that feels as a reader, and let people, have a little bit of a go at that themselves too. So the first one, tell me anything that particularly caught your attention or catches your attention. So if I was reading to students, so these would be, if I'm reading to them, I can use it as a prompt beforehand. Tell me about the parts you didn't like. Was there anything that puzzled you? Have you read other books, stories or poems like this? Tell me about them. What sticks in your memory most vividly? And can you tell me how they were alike? Which character interested you the most? Is that character the most important person in the story? Or is this story really about someone else, but that character interested you the most? Who was telling the story? Do we know? So these kinds of questions, can you see how they're the
well, I think they put the child in the driver's seat,
yes.
don't they? They're not just here's your question, now answer it. It is really they are coming up with the goods.
Yes.
It's putting them in charge. They're in control. They're self-motivated, self-regulated, self-directed.
Yeah. And they're really getting to do that through the life of that story being read on that day, or that chapter, or that picture book, or that poem. We can also ask around informational text. So by giving them that kind of thinking to do, then of course we've already set them up for a really rich discussion. So after reading, so if we're doing it as a read aloud, after reading, I've really got some big talking that we can do here. Not me as teacher doing the talking, but this is about the collective now. So what have we all, let's get all of our thinking.
I remember doing
now.
These questions with my classes a fair while back, but it was fantastic. The depth of thinking, the answers that they were coming up with, it was amazing.
Yes. Yep. I know it tapped into a different, it opened the door, didn't it, into, all right, I don't have to just listen for, or what is it that I have to listen for? It actually gives purpose for listening or for reading. What good readers do, they set a purpose for their reading. They're thinking about, they're questioning, they might be wondering already, as we're going. But these kinds of questions, and the point to these questions is too that I'm going to choose questions that are going to enable listeners to do that work.
Yeah.
So I was always very intentional about if what I'm reading today, what is it that is the best prompt that I can give for them to be doing that thinking, and to let them know from the beginning, that this is what I want you to have a think about today. Or this is what you're thinking about as you're listening, so that we can talk about that later. So by bringing these questions to them, and by them practicing as we're doing the read alouds, it's giving them the opportunity to practice so that they know that they can bring this kind of thinking into their own reading.
Now, Sharon, you've got some more sample questions.
All right, because I think I just want to, add just that other layer of, so Aidan Chambers is going to book talk and is a great place to find a whole lot of, that kind of, those thinking questions. We can also, I want to sort of leave people with a few other questions that they might like to try out with their students, and for you to pick and choose from that, just to give it a try and see what kinds of thinking come from that. So if we were having students thinking about, so we might be teaching like the comprehension strategy of making connections, But what kind of question could we lead with so that we could get students to do that kind of thinking? So making text connections, we might come up with, well, how does this story actually make you feel? So as we're thinking about it, we're making connections to that text by thinking about how it's making us feel. So rather than just that I made a text to self connection, let's talk about that as, as a bigger piece rather than just taking this one element of, oh, well, this, I connect to the text in this way. How do we connect with it with our feelings? So that might be a text connection. If you're doing, as I say, that as a comprehension strategy, that's one of those sort of global questions to get them thinking about, well, that's how we're using it to get to be thinking more about the whole text. A setting question, we might get them to think about as they're reading or as they're listening to reading. So where and when is this story taking place? So that we can start thinking about, oh, where is this story happening? So that's me thinking about the text. Where and when is this story taking place? If I was thinking about characters, are there any powerful characters in this story? And what makes them that way?
That's a good one.
So that's questions that are getting us thinking then about what, not just who was the, are there? None of these are closed questions.
I think that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah, this is that. So who are the powerful characters in this story and what makes them that way? So that's thinking about the text. What makes them powerful? What's the evidence of that from the text? What can I work out from the text? All right, what about the plot? How does the author begin the story to engage the reader? Now we might say, what's that got to do with plot? Well, right from the beginning of the story, plot just doesn't happen somewhere down in the middle of the story. How does the author engage us from the very beginning in this story? Because that is getting us into the plot.
Mm-hmm.
Theme. What's the theme? So what's the author really saying in this story? So as we are thinking about this, we are thinking through, what are they really saying in this story? Perspective. So who is telling this story? How are they the best person to be telling it? Isn't that a great question?
That's a great question, yeah.
So it's taking it further, like what makes them the best person to be telling this story? Around language. So what are those interesting words or phrases or sentences that we found or that we came across, that really got us thinking about this? Interesting words, phrases or sentences. Back to Aidan Chambers. There's one question, and it's his wording of this question that I particularly love, and we have in fact asked this one. But when you think of this story now, what is the most important thing about it for you? We all bring our own thoughts, and we all get different things from books and from story. And that has got to be the question that I asked most often when I was teaching, and I still love to ask that question. When you think now about this story, what is the most important thing about it for you? So they're big questions. They're big.
So to help teachers, Sharon, some nifty resources they can go to, like they've got the Aidan Chambers books.
Yes.
Especially Tell Me.
Yes.
What other resources have got some good questions that teachers could go to?
All right. So if you have got the Guiding Readers and Writers, years 3 to 6 by Fountas and Pennell, in there are a number of pages in the chapter on responding to literature, questions to support comprehension. And it's these types of questions. They are questions to support that thinking. So that's another great place to look for it.
Yep.
What I am going to promise that we will put in with the notes of this one will just be another list of some questions that people can access and try out. You might be focusing on some comprehension strategies like some inferencing or predicting. I will list some that can link directly to that so that they're not just related. They're not just the, good readers summarise after reading or good readers synthesise, but we can ask things like, say for a synthesis type question, so describe characters or describe a character using information from several sections as the author reveals the character traits. That's synthesizing information. That's going, oh my goodness, yes, what the character did here, later on in the story they've done this, later on they've done that. Let me now, this is what I'm thinking about this character now that I know they did this, they did that, they've said this, they've acted on that. So these questions come from a resource no longer in existence, but I'll pull some of those questions out to
right. So watch out in the show notes for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I guess the only thing I would say also, Sharon, is that we are definitely connecting to one of our timeless T's, thinkers talking, aren't we?
Yes, yes. Talking is, and that's why I like the, Aidan Chambers calls it book talk.
Yep. And
he often starts with that, tell me. These are also, and we've talked about through Read Aloud, we can bring these, we can try this thinking, but we want to take it into our own reading. And conferring with students doesn't only have to be, listening to them read and, we can also ask them some of these questions too.
So there's multiple, in the literacy lesson, there's multiple opportunities for using this questioning.
Yes.
And it's questioning that empowers the student. That's the big thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep. The questioning and then that talking, because as E.E. Cummings, that quote, how can I know what I think until I hear what I say?
Yep.
And so that I suppose that really kind of comes to that, the idea that we're really trying to enhance the experience of this thinking that they're doing. We really truly want them to enjoy conversations, the thinking that they can be doing, the insights they discover, the wondering that they're doing.
And I must say this leads to more joyful teaching as well.
Yes.
You get a really strong relationship with your children as well because of all this, don't you?
Yes,
Yep.
yes.
Yep.
Yeah, and I feel, I feel like I probably haven't done it justice, to really talk about just the joy that I have, or that we both have really experienced from this, whether it's with our own classes or working or going into class. I'll never forget the year 2 class, working with them and just opening up with that. As I'm reading today, I want you to be wondering.
Yep.
And the wonderings that came from that time with those students, and I'll never forget the teacher going, I never knew my class could think that way. And that's not because she wasn't a great teacher, but it was a new strategy. And it really does depend on us opening up the opportunities to think in an open way rather than a closed way. And one final thing that I haven't done today is I haven't connected to the Australian curriculum. And I know not all people are connecting to the Australian curriculum, but there's some important pieces here where it talks about comprehension strategies. It talks about using strategies. And to be able to do that, we need these are the kinds of questions that are going to open up those strategies further. So we're not just limiting it to I visualised or I connected. So I'm hoping that the questions that we add at the end will also, in the show notes, will really sort of give examples of how we can have those strategies operating through questions. But there's 2 other parts on the curriculum: personal responses to ideas, characters and viewpoints in texts. It's these kinds of questions that really lead to much stronger responses, to personal responses. A Year 3 teacher that I've been working with has said, this was exactly one of her questions. She said, my questions are only getting very simple responses. I need bigger questions. I need better questions.
So they're getting personal.
And so, and that's exactly where I was coming from all those years ago. Why am I just getting, these responses when there's much more thinking that they can be doing? And the other one on the curriculum is about expressing preferences and evaluating texts. We'll find that a lot of these questions are really coming from there, and that includes listening to the opinions of others, so that these questions, we're all coming with our own. What about that lovely question about, what does this text really mean for me? We've all got our own opinion around that. And so to hear, that's why the discussion is so important. That means that we can hear what other people think. And that's what I love so much about talking about books with others, because others always have different insights than I do. And that adds to my thinking and my understanding. And so there's wonderful value in that. So I did talk about, using these questions, through the read alouds and enabling students to apply that for themselves. I will just mention to you I think I might have said, but I would anchor the questions on a chart, the kinds of discussion. I don't have to anchor all of that, but sometimes there are some key thoughts and ideas that we might want to bring forth, because some of those ideas are so big and so powerful that anchoring them on that chart there is showing such respect and value for this thinking about reading that's being done. When students are doing that for themselves, we might go, how do I ever catch that? That's where turn and tell is so good as well. So children get to talk to each other about these very things. So when they've been thinking about their reading, so who was there, what did this story mean for them?
That's where the anchor chart would come in really handy during a turn and tell, wouldn't it? Where they could look up at the anchor chart to help them ask some of those really deep questions.
And guess what? If we've got them up on anchor charts, it might not be the one that we've done that day that we've taken into our we want them to start using these bigger questions to bring to their reading at any time. So that it's not just I only think about this on this day and I only think about that on that day. So turning and telling or coming back to discuss some things, and sometimes to catch that in their reader's notebook. What my reading meant for me today, or to catch my thinking on paper. And those responses are incredible nuggets for us to find out about the kinds of thinking our students are doing about their reading.
And we're going to end on that nugget because it's a beauty. Gold nugget, really.
It always is, Phil. Always is.
And thank you, Sharon, for a wonderful session today on thinking about reading. And now let's get on to our next session, which is key question 2. What's a good tool that you've been using in the classroom with teachers?
All right, so
recently
we will. I'm going to make the tool. We'll have them on the show notes. We'll have that as a starting tool for you.
Fantastic.
And if we can along the way on our Facebook page, especially if we can add more connections or links or resources for that, we'll let people know. But that is something that I am so often asked about. What kinds of questions can we be asking?
Fantastic. And key question 3, what's a tantalising text that you've been using?
Oh, okay. I'm bringing an Oliver Jeffers book today. I love all of Oliver Jeffers' book, but the one today that I've been using recently is called An Alphabet of Stories, from Once Upon an Alphabet. Such a great little book in that for each letter of the alphabet, there is a story. So we can go from A through to Z. So let me just give an example of, I'm just picking R. Robots don't like rain clouds. Robots don't like rain clouds, so they steal them from the sky, from everywhere and anywhere. That's why it's been so dry. I'm sure you have been wondering, what's with all this dust? Well, robots don't like getting wet. They don't do well with rust. So there's a little poem for the R story of the alphabet.
Beautiful.
But not every story for the alphabet is in a poem form. So then we have letter S, sink or swim. This is the story of a regular cucumber who watched a program about sea cucumbers and thought it might be a better life for him. That very evening, the regular cucumber went to the shore and, taking a last look around, plunged into the sea. However, never having tried before, he hadn't realised he couldn't swim and sank straight to the bottom. He hasn't been heard from since. But don't worry, the owl and the octopus are on their way. So Oliver Jeffers, what he does so beautifully here is has fun with the letter, but not in an alliterative kind of way. He's using lots of words that contain the letter to actually make an engaging and fun story, because we don't actually need to use just words starting with that letter to make, to be using that letter. So I bring it to you because one of the things that we have been doing with this book lately is using it as a great little quick write example or mentor text, so that very quickly we can have students choosing a letter of the alphabet to write a little story and then put that together as a class book. So really easy to have a fun way, a great model. It's beautifully illustrated. Each story is over 2 pages with the sort of the punch often appearing on the second page, or the use of ellipsis. So lots of features there, but just such a great book to use to get some quick writes happening.
A great book and a great author to watch for.
Yes.
And we'd love you to try out some of these resources we've recommended in this podcast in your classrooms. It would be wonderful to hear about how those things worked out.
Yes, I'm hoping there's some useful nuggets there for people to take away.
And how you've used questions.
Yes.
And discussion. All right, thank you everyone for joining us on the podcast today. It's been wonderful having you with us, and thank you, Sharon, for all your insights and your nuggets. Oh. And we look forward to having you on next time.
Looking forward to being back.
Bye now.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.